Hello everyone, and welcome to the Hobby Graveyard. In today's video, we'll be embracing our inner Lewis Tiffany and turning our hands to stained glass, or possibly jeweled facets depending on how you look at it. This is a technique that you can apply to any number of models or areas and could be achieved through freehand alone, and that's where I first got the idea to try it. Freehand is a topic near and dear to my heart, as it's how I entered the YouTube hobby space when I painted a panel for Squidmar Miniatures Warlord Titan diorama. This was both my first commission and my first attempt at freehand that wasn't just a splotch of paint on a cape or some slightly out of alignment checkerboard designs on the tights of a harlequin. Since then I've done a bit more and eventually I'll do a full video on it. However, for the moment we'll stick to something a little simpler. Can't have every video being an hour-long epic or I'll never finish a project. Anyway, enter the Vampire Lord from the Soulblight Gravelords army in Warhammer Age of Sigmar. Quite a divisive model by all counts. There's a contingent of hobbyists who don't like the bats, and there's some who do. I quite like them, but in the past I thought they were a bit silly. There are others who don't like the head, some who don't like the armour, the pose, the presence of it, and even some who don't like the fact that it can only be equipped with a mace. Some of these I happen to agree with, but I'm not skilled enough in the way of conversions or resculpting to make any significant changes to the model itself. Instead, I suggest we make some additions with paint. To do this, I say we turn to that other great distraction, video games, and specifically the Castlevania series, or close to it, more bloodstained Ritual of the Night, the newer version of the Castlevania series that Konami aren't doing anything with. The art that appeared in the trailers and the Steam page features the protagonist Miriam holding her sword up, and on the flat of it we can see a stained glass effect surrounded by a metallic shield. This stained glass effect continues throughout the game, but in this case it gave me the idea for how we might improve the shield. Or not necessarily improve, but change it, style it in a way. What if, rather than it being a shield that has been designed to look like a wing, or purely like that anyway, what if it was part of a larger piece that was then repurposed from, say, a broken window, from a church or a castle? As the shield is already faceted, the draconic design in the middle will work as being either stained glass or jeweled. Then, on the background of the shield, it can be metallic or flat with perhaps a solid colour or a gradient onto it, with then a metallic tone around the edge that's in a known metal such as gold or silver for ease of identification. Now this all sounds good on paper, but let's see if it works on the miniature itself. We start from a zenithal pre-highlight of Tamiya flat white over black and block in the colours that we want our stained glass sections to be. In this case I'm using royal purple, dark magenta, jade and dark blue. These are applied generally over the dragon design on the shield itself, making sure that no two of the same sections are touching one another, or that there's always at least one or two colours in between. A few layers later to make sure the colours are nice and opaque, and we're left with a good basis to work from. In order to break up each colour and have a clear demarcation between each, we then apply a solid black line between each of the separate sections, trying to make it as neat as possible, but keeping all the other colours on the palette just in case we should make any mistakes. Now we will be highlighting and shading each segment later on, so if you want to get through this step a little quicker, if the case that you may want to apply this to an army, let's say, then you could just outline and do the edge highlights as you see fit. You'll be painting over them anyway, so that's just up to you. In order to make this a little easier for me, since I'm filming, I used an Artis Opus Series M size 000, which is nearly a single bristle and barely shows up on the camera. It doesn't hold much paint though, so I do have to keep going back and forth to my palette. If you're feeling brave or just have very good brush control, you might want to do this with a larger paintbrush. Once we've got all those sections neatly marked out, we can start highlighting. I started trying to highlight the areas with transparent white from Monument Hobbies mixed into each of the starting tones. The theory behind this was that it would thin the paint without compromising the coverage. However, this had the opposite effect, so I quickly replaced it with some Schmincke Titanium White. As this is a heavy body paint, it needs thinning a little more than usual, but has superb coverage. The usage of titanium white from Schmincke is a little trick that I picked up from Ben Comets, although the titanium white from Monument Hobbies in the Matte Sex Wish set is just as good, if not better. I added equal parts white to the base colour of each stained glass segment and put the highlight at alternating areas of each facet. Basically, if there's a highlight on one, opposite there is a shadow, and vice versa. I also add some lines around the edges in order to show that there is light shining off the surface. For the blue, I think the dark blue was perhaps a little too dark, and so rather than adding white to it, which would desaturate it, I just added blue from Monument Hobbies to the palette and applied that instead. This adds vibrancy without affecting the saturation. For the jade section, I also just used bright jade since it was a paint that I owned and it was next to my desk at the time. I then decided to do a little adjustment and balancing over the design and glazed some of the shadows either back in, or in the case of the jade, added some that were previously not present. For the jade sections, I glazed in dark jade since it was already pre-mixed and wouldn't desaturate, again because it was next to my desk. For the purple, I glazed dark purple, the magenta, more dark magenta, and the blue, some of that dark blue from before. Much like with adding white, black desaturates a colour, and while this is normally the method that I shade and highlight with for when I'm painting normally, for this some saturation was desired. Once that was all taken care of and the darker areas are done, it's time to go to the brightest we can. Unlike metals, glass and jewelled areas benefit from a sudden jump in highlights rather than using midtones in between. Using titanium white again, I added some highlights to the middle of each facet in order to really make it sparkle, or the middle of where my highlights were. Once that was done, I did a spot of tidying up and some balancing, as well as reapplied some of the black borders around the facets where I'd painted over them. You may not necessarily need to do this step, I did because, well, I was a bit messy at places. I was in two minds as to what to do for the background of the shield, and thought of just doing freehand all over it in a similar manner to what I'd done on the dragon, doing say some landscapes or possibly a crescent moon, something vampiric that wouldn't look out of place on the cover of an Anne Stokes book. However, as this would take ages and the facets were a lot larger than the emblem, I thought to instead go for a blood dragon colour scheme. See the current battle tome for more information. I did this by applying a base coat of burgundy from Monument Hobbies and then shading it with two mixtures of burgundy and black in a 1:1 and then 1:2 mix. Red or reddish non-metallic metals or gradients have a nasty habit of turning orange or pink if you over-highlight them, and the only way to fix them is a lot of time-consuming glazes. Normally I'm not averse to this, but in this case I thought it might overshadow the emblem if it became too bright, so after some shading I then added a tiny amount of white to burgundy and applied an edge highlight on each of the larger facet edges that look rather like wing pinions if we imagine it. Once that was sorted, it was time to do the gold. Could have done silver, but I chose gold because it's nice and warm. You can approach gold, non-metallic metal, from a number of different starting tones, but a good reddish tone works wonders. As I'd already got some mixed on my palette and felt it would keep the shield looking tonally consistent, I used a mixture of burgundy and black in a 1:1 ratio over a black foundation. Once this was complete, I added some dark golden brown to that mix and then sketched out the highlight frame. For more information on this, I suggest watching the video on the goblin on pigback. After that, I added some pure dark golden brown to the shield, applying it on a slightly smaller area than the frame so we start to build up to the colour that we want, but we still have that gradient being built up. By this point, we want to start adding some brighter tones to the gold, and so we can use golden brown itself also from Monument Hobbies. Adding this in multiple mixes to the shield of 2:1 dark golden brown to golden brown, then 1:1 and 1:2 respectively, we're getting closer and closer to a nice sparkly gold. If you're trying this at home, make sure that you're always dragging the brush towards the middle of the highlight or toward the brightest point. We also do the edge highlights too at this point just to show where the edges are and to keep them nice and shiny too. Again, for more information on non-metallics, do watch the other video that's up on this channel. For the final highlight, we add white to the mix in 2 increments until we're up to almost pure white for the extremely bright areas where the gold can really start to sparkle. For pure white, we do this sparingly, otherwise it can overpower the rest of the metallic area and we wouldn't want that, would we? And with that, we have a finished shield fit for any vampire lord, aspiring or otherwise. Why not give it a try on something of yours? If you do, feel free to tag me on Instagram or an equivalent and show me the results. If you want to see the rest of the Vampire Lord, leave a comment down below and I'll add it to my big list of video ideas. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you're new to the channel, welcome and thank you for watching. If you want to see more, like, subscribe and tell your friends, or whatever YouTube says that you have to do these days to get noticed. I don't really know. The plan for the future of the channel is to have one longer video per month with shorter videos in between on whatever should take my fancy when I sit down at my desk, or just shorter self-contained projects. The longer videos will focus on one display project at a time and could be anything from box art that I'm working on to passion projects of mine. Anyway, that's enough from me. See you in the next one.